sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you know, the good news is you already have a foundation there, and you can tinker with it, and you can just reshape it to the designs of the prompt. But I'm glad you. Anybody else have any questions about the assignment before we get going? I'll ask again at the end of the session, but.
Real quick, I have a problem with my Zoom.
Okay.
Every time I press start video, it just grays out the screen, and now I can't see anything.
Oh no. Well, the only thing you're seeing it right now is, and probably for the rest of the session, is my ugly mug, and then you know, your classmates. So we're in other words, we're not going to be doing any. I'm not going to be doing screen share or anything for anything important. So yeah, you're not missing out on much. Okay, well, yeah. So today, what I want to do is talk about the documents that are due for reading for today, and these documents are also pertinent for the paper that is due at the end of today. So hopefully this will be helpful for many of you to just review what this week's documents are about, and if you have a better grasp on them, you can use them if you're still writing your paper. So thing I want to ask you guys, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and next week's going to be a little bit simpler because I'll give you some guided reading questions to follow along. So that way, because I realize, you know, after the first couple of weeks, I'm kind of just throwing you guys in the deep end of these things. If you had like a guide to help you pick out the main ideas, that might be more beneficial for more people. So you can count on that next week. Anyway, but I think these documents are fairly straightforward. The first one is Arthur Young travels in France, and he travels throughout France at the very beginnings of the French Revolutionary period. In a general sense, what is going on in France that makes it such a horror show? Like, what are problems that people are having in France?
Well, I guess one thing is the fact that, like, after the bad harvest, bread prices have gone way up. And speaking of which, I remember I saw another thing about the French Revolution, that bread was like a central part to the French diet, and that's why it was so bad for the French.
Yeah, you're right. Food prices are going up like crazy. There's a bad harvest. The bread that they do make is made out of like barley and rye, which isn't like, those are grains, but they're not like wheat. So, you know, you're eating this like Franken bread, and it's not good for you. It doesn't taste like anything. Yeah, the French love their bread. You can still walk into county market or something, and you can buy like a fresh, you know, a baguette, a French loaf of bread. You know, they're famous for it. But bread is just the diet of the common people, really all throughout the West at this time. So for bread prices to go up is really bad because a lot of people are going hungry. Yeah. What else? What other problems is France having, at least in the countryside?
Unemployment.
Yeah, Tyler, high unemployment. People are struggling to get by. Yeah, definitely. What other problems are there?
I would probably say, would you say disgruntlement because of like unfair laws? Like wasn't, I think in the book they said like, shoot, in the book it was like the nobles were able to like trample some of their crops for hunting, and a lot of like poor treatment, and like the taxes levied against them, like the mill tax and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah. So the oppression of the lower classes by the upper classes. You know, we talk about in America the richest 1% or 0.1%. You know, the kind of Bernie Sanders message of like, the richest 100 people in the United States have more wealth combined than like the bottom 50% of the population, you know, which is true. But in France, it's a little bit more egregious than that, even because like if you're rich, you can get away with doing whatever you wanted. Not only do you pay very little in taxes, but yeah, you can go hunting in the common woods that are forbidden, you know, for peasants to go hunting. You can do whatever. And in the document on page, we'll get to the nobility in just a second, especially when we talk about the next document. But you know, there's this Arthur Young, he's an Englishman, and he clearly sees that the average Joe in France is just getting shat on by the nobility who don't give a crap about them. And this is a big problem. Okay. Any other injustices that you want to point out from this document? Is there anything we missed? Food prices are up. You know, people are massively in debt, by the way. One of the big problems that he sees is that every generation kind of divides the property of like the father with his children equally. So people are inheriting smaller and smaller plots of land to farm on. And this is a bad idea because like you can't really make a living by farming an acre of land, you know. It's to feed yourself for the entire year on an acre of land or something like that. The justice system is broken. There's another one I pointed out. Kids are dying from malnutrition. So like, you know, the most vulnerable people in France are dying. And this is a travesty because France used to be the richest nation in the West. So whose fault is this? Why are all these things happening? Who does Arthur Young point to and be like, it's the fault of this entity that all these bad things are happening? Is it the commoner's fault? Are they just being irresponsible? Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely the king's fault. I mean, especially in a monarchy, the people are automatically gonna blame the one guy who's in charge.
Yeah, the buck stops with the king, right? If he holds all the power, he makes all the decisions. There's no other decision-making body, you know. It's on the king. Like the buck stops with him. There's a couple quotes that you could pull out from this document that you could, if you wanted to, you could use in your paper to back up why people are feeling aggrieved by the government in France. On page 650, Arthur Young specifically says the government abandoned them, meaning the farmers and the people of France, to the mercy of the privileged orders. In other words, he's letting the richest 1% just dump on everybody because he doesn't want to piss off his noble friends. And again, on page 652, he points the finger even more directly than that. The true judgment to be formed of the French Revolution must surely be gained from an attentive consideration of the evils of the old government. In other words, it's the government. It's the government's fault that so many people in France and the countryside, the farmers, the kids that are dying of malnutrition, that are eating shitty bread, like it's the government's fault because they could do things to fix this and they choose not to, right? So there you go. Like you have a couple specific instances in this document of an outside observer going to France and being like, holy crap, the French government is completely dysfunctional. It's completely falling apart. And no wonder they're having a revolution, right? Like no wonder people are peeved by this, you know? So there you go. Like there's a very clear portion of evidence here that the French government needs to be reformed at the very least, or at the very most overthrown and set up with something different, right? We're seeing a breaking of the social contract that we talked about last week. You know, the government's supposed to look out for the common good, and in return, people obey laws. Well, guess what? If the government's not looking out for the common good, then the people get to, you know, break the laws. Like, what's holding them back anymore? So moving on then to the second document is Abbe Sieyes. He's one of my favorite people in all of French Revolutionary history. He's a priest who becomes a radical political activist. And I love it when religious people remove themselves from the pulpit and actually put their beliefs into action. It's a very inspiring thing. And Abbe Sieyes is one of those people. He's like, look, you know, I'm preaching to the people every week. I'm hearing their pleas, their cries for pain. I want to help them in a material way. So he talks about the third estate. Abbe Sieyes talks about this portion of the population called the third estate. What is the third estate?
Isn't the third? Sorry, you can go.
No, you go. I already spoke.
Oh, I already spoke twice.
It's a lower class of people.
Yeah, the lower classes are represented in the third estate. Who else is represented in the third estate? Do you know?
I believe it was like lawyers, merchants, but the lower merchants, the lower lawyers, like the people who weren't able to afford nobility or to buy nobility.
Yeah. So maybe a better way of asking this would have been, who is not the third estate? So a way of thinking about this, there's three estates that the French kingdom is kind of is categorized. And it doesn't matter for the most part. It's just kind of there. Like, they don't actually meet regularly as a democratic body. But the first estate is the clergy, the Roman Catholic presence in France. They have one kind of collective special interest group. The second estate is the nobility. And then the third estate is literally everybody who doesn't fit those first two categories. It's the common people, which are most people. It's merchants, it's lawyers, it's college professors, you know, it's it would be doctors, it would be librarians, like not even just like non-common, like common. There's the commoner, the peasants in the French countryside, but there's also like the middle class. They get thrown in with the everybody else category because they're not fat rich and they're not clergy. So the third estate is like 95% of France, right? Like, but when the three estates meet, when the king calls together, because he's so badly in debt and he needs to reform taxes, the king calls together the estates general, these three estates, and the representatives meet, and you get like three clergymen, you get three people from the nobility, and then three people who are supposed to represent millions of other folks. And it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So So Abbe Sieyes, I don't know if anyone picked up on this, but how does he define like the nation of France? Like, who belongs to the nation of France? Who wants to take a stab at, like, who's included in this nation?
Would it be just like the working class of France? Does he not like include the nobility and like the king?
Yeah. He doesn't include the noble class. You know, he says the third estate is the nation of France. Like, everything we need in France comes from the third estate, from the farmers, the doctors, the professors, the teachers, the social workers, the whatever. Everything we need to run a civil society is in the third estate. The leeches of society are not the peasantry. It's those assholes living in their big mansions, not contributing anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's ability. It's the king. Like, they don't matter. He says this on page 654 very, very directly. The nobility is not a part of our society at all. Like, he literally said, nobility is not a part of our society.
Mm-hmm.
Rich people, the Bill Gateses and Jeff Bezoses and, you know, whoever else they're making France worse by being here, not better.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're sucking up all of the wealth and they're not looking out for the common good.
Yeah.
They're
Here's my thinking though. How did those laws of like hunting privileges even start?
Oh, it goes way back. Those are like medieval things that are still traditional.
Because I would just think that's like a fundamental part of human, society, our hunters. So why would that not be like a law for everyone?
Yeah, there's a lot in Western Civ 1, you know, we talk about this a little bit of like, you know, the slow accumulation of power and privilege among the very few. And yeah, we go from like a hunting gathering society in the Stone Age to farming society, and then eventually hunting becomes like a very elite activity. Like, it's an activity that's reserved for the upper class. So it's kind of crappy. But so Abbe Sieyes, this radical priest, has his eyes opened. He's part of the first estate, by the way. Like, he's part of the clergy. And he looks at France and goes, this is effed up, guys. Page 653, he says, if the privileged order was removed, the nation would not be something less, it would be something more. France would be better off if we kicked these richy riches out of power. So when I ask you about justice in this paper, and if you haven't already written it, if you're still working on it, the reason I'm having this conversation with you guys today is this idea of justice is not just an Enlightenment thing where they're like theorizing about, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had a government that, you know, would punish crimes in the mildest way possible. You know, we have this idea of the social contract. Wouldn't it be great if like the king upheld that? By the time we get to the French Revolution, or right at the beginning of the French Revolution, people are going, there's no justice anywhere. Like, I'm not seeing it. It's completely devoid. Like, the top 1%, you know, the nobility, have robbed the nation of justice. And it'd be better off if we got rid of them. Like, whoa, like, get your guillotines out, you know? Like,
Well, they even got to the point where they redid the calendar to a point where it even makes sense.
yeah, once we get in, yeah, so once you get into the French Revolution proper, they not only do they kick out the rich people, but they reform all of society. And it's this really weird thing where they get rid of December, you know, and holidays and stuff like that. So the French get a little crazy with their revolution. It goes a little off the rails. But the idea there is that we need to restore justice and equality and equity to the common good, the common people. What is a nation if not to serve the greater interest? So one last thing I want to talk about with you guys, and then I'll leave a lot of time for questions if you guys have questions. Is the last document is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This is their Declaration of Independence in France, more or less, right? Thomas Jefferson in the United States, in the American Revolutions, you know, all men are created equal. We get these inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. This is the French version of that, and it goes on to impact the rest of the West, basically. Like, America does its own thing over here, but in France, they crib the notes from Thomas Jefferson, and they create their own Declaration of Independence, and Bill of Rights. And that's a big deal for a country that still has a king. So what are some of the rights of man? And this, this is a pretty easy question. I hope for many of you to answer. What are some of the rights that are spelled out in this document? Like, even if you're furiously looking it up right now, you can find really quickly what are some of the fundamental rights that are laid out in this document in France? Anybody?
I guess one was resistance to oppression.
Okay, you have the right to resist oppression.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty broad. Who gets to decide what oppression is? We kind of look at this as our Second Amendment, I suppose, in the United States, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, the right to bear arms. France has more of a general, like, you have the right to resist oppression, so you can read into that however you want. What else? What other rights are spelled out in this document?
The right to security, which is also kind of vague.
Yeah. What does that mean? The right to security on an individual level, on a collective level? Do I have the right to shoot someone if they trespass on my property? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, so these are pretty vague.
Yeah, especially in like America today, going back to sorry, I don't know who said it, but like oppression. I mean, especially like looking around today, you could almost make a claim that anything's oppressive. So I mean, you're kind of like, I wonder how that's working in France right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'll just spoil it for you. It's not great. The people take this, like, because it's so vague and open to interpretation, a lot of people take this in a very weird direction. And so as you do your textbook readings for next week, you'll read about like what happened, the three phases of the French Revolution. It gets pretty bloody. There's vigilante justice. There are mobs roving the streets claiming to be oppressed and to fight oppression. It gets pretty bad. So, yeah. What other rights are spelled out? Are there any of them that kind of sound familiar to what we see in like the American example?
Freedom of religion. Freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
Yeah, absolutely. Freedom of religion. This is our First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law establishing an official religion. That was a big problem in England, where you have the Church of England, and if you're not a part of it, then you don't have as many rights. In France, they hate the Jews at this time and later, and so and they hate Protestants, and so like if you're not the right flavor of Christianity or you're a Jew.
So basically, Germany and France switch places.
Well, anti-Semitism is a long-running tradition in the West, in a lot of places, including the United States. We think of anti-Semitism as like, Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. It's been going on for literally hundreds of years before that. And France is definitely a part of that tradition. Everyone hates the Jews in the West for a really long time. Yeah. Freedom of speech. You can't get thrown in jail for saying something nasty about the king anymore.
Of course, I guess during the Reign of Terror, you got thrown in prison for saying something bad about Robespierre.
Yeah, and that's where things get really bad. So when the revolution kicks off, a lot of these rights go away, or they're there on paper, but they're not being enforced. And that's that's one of the failures of the French Revolution. Good. So the right to free speech, right to print and say whatever you want in the media. These are important cornerstone rights of a democratic society. Do you disagree with any of the rights that are spelled out? Do you think any of them are kind of dangerous or vague, or like Nick already highlighted, I think, where I was going to go with this, but do any of these sound kind of scary to you, or like going too far in one direction?
Well, actually, here's the thing. It's kind of even just like with the United States Constitution. So, what the one like the right to resist oppression of a tyrannical government. Thing is, though, isn't that exactly what the Confederates did during the Civil War? And that's where it gets iffy. You know what I mean? Where like they like are doing it for a bad reason. Like probably even thinking of the Russian Revolution, even though that may be a little iffy, because like both would bring a lot of like destruction and evil, but they did have kind of a right to resist what they saw as an oppressive government.
Yeah. The South in the United States claimed that the North broke the social contract. And so these things are up for interpretation, depending on your idea of oppression. Now, African Americans living in Alabama definitely thought that the government of Alabama was breaking the social contract by holding them in slavery. And therefore they would have been justified in rising up and trying to overthrow that government too. So yeah, it's turtles all the way down, man. It's just whatever your view of oppression is, you can take action on according to these Enlightenment ideals. So there's number 17 in the rights of the Declaration of Rights. Number 17, property is an inviolable and sacred right. No one can deprive you of your property except by public necessity. We kind of have something like that in the United States. The government can seize your property if it's considered for the public good, but you have to be fairly compensated for it. But in our constitution, you don't necessarily have a right to have property. Like that sounds, if you take that in too far in one direction, that'll be communism, or socialism, I should say. So there are certain things in here that get a little out of hand, or that are too vague. Nick mentioned like the right to resist oppression. What does that even mean? Well, it's not clear. It's not clear what that means. And the French Revolution gets really bad. It becomes a civil war for many years. So what I wanted to hopefully highlight here is that, these documents address these Enlightenment ideals of the social contract. We're seeing the government arguably break the social contract in France, and so people feel the need to do something about it. But is justice something you're able to seek out through revolution? It's unclear. The right to resist oppression sounds great until it devolves into mobs roaming the streets of Paris with pitchforks, dragging rich people out of their houses and killing them on sight. That doesn't sound like justice to them, to the people being dragged out, So you can wrestle with these questions however you want in the paper. Like, however you want to address these big ideas is completely up to you. The only thing, I don't care ultimately where you land on these things. You could call the French Revolution good. You could call it bad. It's up to you. All I care about is that you back up your argument with evidence. That's the whole point of this whole thing. And I find this important, not because I need everyone to know things about the French Revolution. I think it's important as a historian, obviously, but what I'm more concerned with is that you guys as college students are learning the ability to make a reasoned argument and backing it up with some kind of concrete evidence. Because not to get on my soapbox right now, but American society is just awash in people who just run around making shit up and just lying about anything and everything, and just coming up with things because it makes them feel good, or they only listen to the sources they want to hear.
Mhm.
I'm
And I
sorry,
think
it doesn't work that way. Real life doesn't work that way.
And I think that's a sad thing about reality is just like that's for both sides because you want to listen to the to facts that will back your own opinion. You know what I mean? But it's much harder for you to actually listen to facts that may contradict your opinion. I
Yeah,
think that's something we should work towards. You know, being able to actually listen to facts and make your opinions from the facts and not shaping the facts to fit your opinion.
yeah. So, I mean, this is the whole point of this exercise is for you to make a reasoned argument. And again, like, I don't care what your opinion is, you know, in this, like, I don't care where you stand, as long as I just care about how you're coming to that conclusion, you know, like, I only care about you making a reasoned argument with evidence. Because I think that's one for remaking our society as an educated and reasonable social discourse. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, but I think it's an important part of college education is to learn how to do these things. So are there any lingering questions that anyone has with the paper assignment that's due by the end of today? I've gotten a few drafts already from people, which is great. But you have until 1 minute before the stroke of midnight tonight, 1 minute before Saturday, to finish it and to send it to me through Blackboard. And by the way, the way that you upload this, just in case we're unclear about this, is you click on the analysis paper 1, like you click on that link in Blackboard, and it gives you a place to upload your Word document or PDF or whatever. But yeah, I've gotten a few already, and that's great. You can start working ahead on week 3 if you want over the weekend. It's already up there on Blackboard, so you can start plugging away at that, do the quiz for next week if you want, and work ahead. But you know, if there's no last minute questions, then I assume we're all set to go. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, I have like one thought, and maybe for like the next chapter. But you know how, and it may be a little off topic too. But you know how today everyone craps on France for being like surrendering during World War II. Yet with Napoleon, they conquered all of Europe. No one ever thinks about that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, John's right. Yeah, and this is in the quiz, by the way. I have a question about this in the quiz for next week. So, yeah, no, France is a powerful place, powerful country until they're not. All right. Well, thanks, guys. This was an enlightening discussion. Enlightenment. And if you have any last minute questions, you know, I'll be on and off my computer all day. I've got family coming in for the weekend, for the holiday weekend, but I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can if you send me anything. All right. Sounds good. Peace out, everyone. Have a good holiday.
But